IP information to someone like that. But if the risk analysis day-to-day doesn't call for that, but then if you're saying, well, if we're not going to be online over the Super Bowl if we don't make this decision, the ability to throw it out there and say, here's our options. You know, and usually it comes down to time frame, and then it comes down to usually someone else making a decision. Because me as an engineer, I've got all the technical pieces and I could do everything, but I also kind of understand that higher ups, that senior decision makers may not know the options that they have. They may not know that we could run the whole thing on, you know, dedicated servers that we get from DreamHost. And, you know, they may not, you know, or they may not say like, okay, well this piece of the company, just delivering images for our website, we just totally offload that to Akamai or some other CDN, which is not part of our day-to-day run, but it's going to lessen everything and it's going to focus on us to just do credit card transactions, because that's what we do. Delivering images is sort of what the company does, and if we're under such a demand that will crush because of it, you know, change up ideas. Yeah.
Do you see this as sort of a subset of business continuity, or
I think it's the extreme of business continuity. I think, you know, your regular day-to-day operations are just normally what you do, and then you have an incident, someone gets hacked, there is, you know, a loss of a laptop, there's you know, whatever it may be. There's normal things that you plan, and these incidents need to be responded to, they need to be taken care of, they need to make sure they don't blow up, but as an incident, it becomes a day-to-day routine process. You have a whole security incident response team that responds to incidents, non-outages. And my sort of view is like it becomes a disaster when sort of both of those teams can no longer do their job. You know, you know, you need to have security there in this to say, no, we can't go to Azure, we can't do that because that violates our PCI compliance because of how the app talks back to the database. And all that would be clear text. Whereas internally, we can take care of that and it's in a different space. So it's totally part of the continuity planning of anything that's long term, but the disaster recovery is sort of just a blip on the screen. Is you know you can always get back to normal. You know everybody else has probably been affected as well. It's not just you, probably, unless it's hacking. That's pretty targeted. But the idea is it's just totally thrown. You know, normal day-to-day operations are out of stock. Okay, and if you do 6 things, what are the 2 most important things you got to do? You know, and it may be simply get up and tell the customers your data is safe. Nobody can get access to it right now, but we're working on the problem, whatever it is. Kind of what I want to get into here is it should be part of the incident response plan. It should be the same people who are in charge of an incident in general, because they're familiar with running incidents. They're familiar with gathering disparate data from different places and responding to it, especially security people responding to threat intelligence from outside the company. But as you go through it, first off, like I said, don't panic. Just take a breath, breathe for a second. You know, I've done this on a conference call with a dozen people that just put everybody on mute for a second and walk around the room. And when they ask me what I'm doing, it's just like I'm thinking. You know, as sort of, as sort of controlling the situation. It's sort of like when I was working for the external companies. They don't want to give you all of their data and all of their traffic. Sort of like all of their internal processes have failed. So that's why they would go to someone else. So if you're controlling the incident internally, you need to sort of step up and take control and say, yeah, we're going to take this break, or I'm going to talk now, or everybody stop for a second. I want to hear from Dave. Dave in networking needs to tell me about BGP and ISP connections and this and that. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but it comes down to communicating and sort of gathering the people around to sort of make decisions. And part of the problem with making a whole plan of like whose responsibility is what is you should kind of figure that, you know, a 5th or a 6th year people are not going to be reachable, either because of vacations or weekends or sickness, or part of the disaster is like they're taking care of their family. They're not going to be able to respond to whatever the problem is. So you find a way to communicate, and then you sort of assemble a team of like who can respond, who's available, who's ready, and then make that sort of a small core team. And then have them look around, and other than just your assessment of the situation of your team, have them tell you, you know, can some of them get to the website and other people can't? Like what networks are working, what networks aren't, things like that. And then of the people that are there, you sort of get control of them and stop them from trying to do quick fixes. You know, if it's hacking or something like that, one of the immediate things is like everybody wants to update it, because you know the vendor has been telling them for several months that you have a bug because of X, and now you have a security incident because of Y, and engineer D says we should update it right now. And you know that may not be the best response or the accurate response to what's going on. And what you want is control of the situation. So they're like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to discuss that sort of thing and work as a team to sort of get that done. So as far as planning, one of the things that always struck me was at the first job I ever worked at and sort of small companies was the big red folder. The company I worked at was in Florida. We had a lot of hurricanes and power outages. It was just sort of a thing that sort of happened every once in a while. And you obviously couldn't look stuff up, couldn't go through your disaster recovery plan if you had the power to look up the wiki. So you had to print stuff out, and that included, you know, the phone numbers, the cell phones of everybody, because cell phones, you know, generally work when everything else. But just sort of to tell, you know, somebody around the world on the next shift, like, hey, I'm not able to do anything anymore. But as part of a disaster, as part of, like, whether it's hacking or something like that, you usually got to think that your normal means of communication may be gone. The Exchange server that you use internally to communicate with everybody, you know, may not be reachable, may not be powered up, that sort of thing. So the idea of the alternates of, you know, your business continuity sort of falls into that to say, okay, well, if I might have to use Gmail, my first choice is Exchange, that's everything I want to do, but I might have to use Gmail. It would probably be a good idea to set up your security incident response team with a few Gmail accounts and have a suite account ready. It only has a few users, it doesn't cost that much, but that you could spin up 100 users really quick on a credit card to handle support for your company. And that's the idea of whether it's email or text or voice or whatever. But sort of these are the three different things. And email is the thing I think is the most important because it's ubiquitous. Everybody's accounts, everyone has alternate accounts. It's rather straightforward to deliver commands because you can be long-winded and say, this is what we want to do, this is what we don't want to do, and nobody can, you know, sort of interfere with that. In text, you're kind of going back and forth, and you kind of lose authoritarian control. But it's great for troubleshooting. So if you're going to be troubleshooting, make sure that you've got various means to do it, even if it means falling back on IRC, which is, you know, the Wild West, but the reason IRC is still around is because it works. It has worked through so many worldwide disasters. Before Twitter or anything else, people used to find out about earthquakes on IRC because there'd be 300 people in the Red Hat channel. Somebody would say it happens. But then, if you've got those the first two, then you can start to build on voice chat, and whether it be, you know, conference calls, go-to meetings, or something like I'm not a huge fan that that's necessary. So long as I've got text chat, and so long as I can kind of communicate with 2 or 3 people, I'm pretty much good. But it's sort of the last thing. And the reason I put Google Hangouts up there again is it's free. I mean, like, if you've got to come up with a plan and you're budget conscious and constrained with everybody, you know, it doesn't take any extra software. It runs in your browser, and there are a couple other things that work like this. But you can sort of plan out these sorts and gather. You know, do they work on Windows? Do they work on Mac? Do they work on Linux? You know, are these the sort of choices that, like, we don't know which one's going to have a problem? So let's just be diverse in the whole aspect of it. So, first thing, like I said, is establish internal communication, gather a routine. The other thing is stop people from talking externally about what's going on. When something happens, like let's say you get hacked, the next thing that happens is the New York Times starts to call. They'll go through LinkedIn, and they'll go through phone numbers, and they'll go through anything. They'll go through contacts, and they'll go through Facebook and wherever. So what you want to do if you're controlling the situation is to just let everybody know, not only not to talk to someone when the New York Times calls, but who should they talk to? Give them an alternative. Give them someone to direct to. That way, when the New York Times calls 4 or 5 people, and those 4 or 5 people all direct them to the same people, they're going to kind of realize they're going to stonewall me everywhere. You know, and hopefully they will stop calling all 64 or 100 and then from the start of the incident, I sort of divide things into slices. And you know, mostly when you're doing Scrum or something like that, you're looking at a week or 2 weeks. You're looking at items that people are working on. And in a disaster, I sort of compress everything into like 24 hours. I expect that I'm going to have an engineer that I'm going to give 2, 3, 4 tasks to over the next, you know, 10 hours of his shift. Or for his position, if he's a 24/7 operation, I'm going to be able to give them short-term stuff. But I also know if I start to give people short-term stuff, that they can't focus on the long-term items. So they can't focus on communicating to other departments to say, what do you have going? What do you have available? Or this is what we have available, what do you need? And that's why I kind of break it out into sort of, if you can imagine an incident starting at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, boom, you have your first meeting. You declare what the problem is, where we narrow our issues down to, what we're going to do, and you send people off and then give them the freedom to work, you know, basically till lunch, and then you come back and it's like, okay, what did you get done? What problems did you have? And then you can have, you know, another 4 hours to the end of the day. And conceptually, if you've got a disaster, which is probably going to last multiple days, you may have to run this cycle for 72 hours. And, you know, while if you're the commander and you're the brave hero, you're going to stay up for 72 hours, your team is not going to. So you're going to have to be able to slice things down into them that fit into their schedule. If you know the guy's going to be off shift, he's got to go to sleep or whatever, don't give him something that's going to be long term, but say, okay, these are my items which are short term. Set up monitoring for me. Set up, you know, go look at scanning and find out what else is out there, what's available, what's down. See if you can find it in log files. You know, slice up any of these tasks and give them to people in short term. They go like, oh, this is really interesting. Now let's spend 4 hours and 2 or 3 people on this sort of project because we can use this item. And that's the thing is, don't bring a lot of people into it. I've been in you know, emergency response conference calls and stuff where I've logged on to the conference call and the little attendant tells you, you know, you're the 25th person to join this call. It doesn't work. My response when I was called on to do this call was immediately find out who was in charge and tell them that we were going to a different conference call. Like, more than explaining or anything else, and I'm like, okay, with 5 or 6 people, tell me your problem, tell me where you're at. Okay, here's how we can respond, here's how we can go. Now, you turn around and take all of this information that we're giving you and give it out to the PR people. but I don't want any PR people in my incident response call at all. I don't care what you think how bad this looks, because I'm going to throw out options which you may not want to, which you may think are terrible, and that's okay, but I need the freedom to throw out a lot of options and discuss it without the idea of how people are going to perceive it. Because I'm a technical person, we presumably have a technical problem, I want to throw options out there that are just maybe just wild. And I don't want to argue with the PR person about why we can't do my fifth or sixth option, because it's just an idea, And afterwards, if that reason is really PR, then it's a whole different level. That's vice presidents. That's their business. This is something I train all the SOC engineers that I deal with, is like, we're not writing poetry. Really, if you have information, communicate that information to me as fast as you can, as raw as you can. If we're looking at TCP dumps and you can just copy and paste off your screen into an email, do it. And I know it gets all like screwed up every time you do anything like that. But, I'm an intelligent engineer who can look at what you're looking at and hopefully derive the same information. I just need you to give me the information. So I don't want you to write up everything. I don't want you to take the perfect PCAP so you can send it along the way. Quickly tell me whatever it is you see, just tell me. And when you tell me, don't use a lot of flowery language. That's the sort of stuff that sends PR people off. That's their fodder. But just reduce what you're talking about to talking about TCP, talking about HTTP, talking about real things as opposed to like avalanches and things like that. Like, so many people respond to things like cyber attacks as if they're Pearl Harbor, like every single attack. None of that helps, and it spins people up and makes them more agitated, when what you want to do is just be calm. And what you want to do is be the most calm person in the room so that you can control what's going on. This is the most important thing of the whole talk that I hope you guys get if you're ever actually getting an incident. You got to report something that's going on. Is look up the actual IP of the thing that you're talking about. Because in disasters, DNS goes down, this goes down, things are internal, you're on an internal VPN or whatever. If we're engineers, if we're InfoSec people, the only thing we deal with is TCP. So why communicate anything that doesn't say TCP in it? This and repeating this and going over and over again, as you change shifts, as you bring in more departments, external people, then repeating it and talking about IP addresses is very, very fact and basic. And nobody can argue, nobody can be confused. You start using domain names, you start using adjectives like the website or the app site or the back end, core. They're very flowery, but they don't mean anything, and nobody can act on it. You talk about IP addresses, and you send information around, and everybody will pick up and be able to add to the information. And also, like, when you get reports from whatever this disaster is, in those first few hours, try to get as much detail out of whatever it is. When a disaster sort of happens, when somebody gets hacked or something like that, or there's an exploit that they respond to. Spend extra time just asking extra information from the people that are reporting to you. Where are you? What apps were you running? How did you do this? How do you normally do your job? How would you like to do this? Because you're taking a sample of the whole company. And that person is willing to sort of give you information, as opposed to you having to go out and grapple and pull information in. You get a report, and somebody actually comes up and says, hey, there's a big flaming skull on my laptop right now. So get as much as you can out of that person who's willing to help you. Those are actually the key starters for recovery. So to wrap it up, I kind of wanted to talk about an incident that happened. So there's a hosting company called The Planet. and they're based out of Houston, Texas. And one day, their data center blew up. They had about 5 data centers. They were mostly in Texas. This was back in 2008, so this was really before everybody was on Azure and everything was so easily backable and stuff like that. But the quote from this is, 3 walls of the electrical equipment room on the first floor blew several feet from their original position, and the underground cabling that powers the first floor of each one was destroyed. Right, it is very specific. As sort of a response, like they're technically telling you exactly, sort of what happens. I was working at a company. I got a call from a guy who was a customer of the Planet. They also use our service. So he had done what I would think was his due diligence to try to prepare for something happening. So even though most of his stuff was his business was clustered on the Planet, he had actually gone through and they'd assured him that it was spread over different data centers, that it was spread over different networks, that everything, is basically his website, his main thing, his support site, which he already envisioned that people are going to have a problem, that I want to set up a support site so people can do that, and this is going to be on a different system. He had tried to plan that. He had his own DNS servers, so he can quickly control everything. He has email servers. The problem was, he had been promised all of this diversity, in all of the naming conventions of everything. Everything seemed like it was differently named, but they were all housed in one data center. So when the data center was upgrading their power, they had that afternoon, they just hooked up a new main switch. They let it sit there, and over the course of a few hours, it overloaded and blew up. As specific as the damage was, is it destroyed the power cables for this. Obviously, if you blow 3 walls out of position, your building's probably not going to be habitable. The fire department doesn't want new guys like switching cables, like with no walls in place below them. So obviously, they just shut down the whole data center. All of the backups, all of the redundancy that had been in place, now no longer apply. So his DNS servers, which he controlled, he had the name servers which he could have reverted back to, except that his instructions for doing that or anything, and his reset for responding to that was in his email servers, which were no longer powered. So to add to this, he was also traveling. He was in an airport when he called me to tell me that everything had blown up. So basically, in our little setup process, as one little extra thing, he happened to give us a telephone number. So there's no way for me to email him. I had never talked to the guy before. There's no way I could, voice verify or socially, understand that. But it happened just to have one extra phone number, which was his personal number, which wasn't his company or corporate anything, but he had it on it. And I was like, look, I'm not going to start making DNS changes and search changes just because you called me and just because I can see that something happened, because I didn't know about the Planet at the time. We're talking like this guy called me 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes after the explosion. I could look and go on the forum for the Planet and read how people were responding. I could see the incident response of the Planet in process, talking about what was down and the various things that were down. So for me, I could just, like put this guy on hold, pick up another line, call